Well, I would say that's probably a big part of the success of the West is this notion of like liberalism. Like it's so unintuitive how positive it is when a bunch of people just leave each other alone except to do business and trade and build like science together and institutions and civilization, neutral rules. And so like in a sense, that's like our most precious thing that we have in our civilization. But the like hypothesis that me and some other people are just starting to think about is like once humans aren't providing value, then it's not so clear that there's any advantage to this liberalist framing of society where you like really want to not try to argue about what is the true religion or the right way to live or whatever. You want to just set some very basic parameters and like then give people their own resources to manage. And so when we're all living on UBI, if anyone is ever able to say like, hey, my way of life is more deserving of UBI than yours, then that is like a very zero-sum competition. We all just become full-time advocates for our like UBI growing faction and trying to like reframe the narrative that our types of people deserve more resources than those guys. We'll probably have to try to reframe this a few different ways, but that's the basic fear.
Great. So I am joined today by David Duvenaud, which is really exciting. David, we met at a workshop that you organized on sort of post-AGI futures, which we were both saying is kind of crazy that we haven't seen anyone else organize that workshop until you did, which was this summer. And I'm really, really excited and curious to dig into what you think is going to happen in a post-AGI future. Not just what's going to happen, but like what are maybe the potential cruxes and things that we need to sort out in order to make it go well, especially. But yeah, maybe we just start with you introducing yourself and a little bit how you came to get into this line of work.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm David Duvenaud. I'm an associate professor at the University of Toronto in computer science and statistics. I recently spent a year and a half doing an extended sabbatical at Anthropic, where I was running a small team that was doing alignment evals, which was basically trying to see if the models could sabotage our decision-making. Like, could they trick us into thinking that they weren't capable of something when they weren't, or steer us secretly towards a bad decision, something like that. I've been sort of following the AI, let's say like AI safety / AI doom case and arguments and space for a long time, probably since about like 2005 or so. And yeah, but only recently was there all that much practical work to do. And then I guess what led me into this recent line of work that's more conceptual and more about the future is just going around and systematically talking to all the smart people I know who have been thinking about this and sort of saying, so what is the plan for what if we even succeed and solve all these tough technical alignment problems? It seems like we're going to be in a very vulnerable position forever. Basically, humans not really being needed for anything that's like could go wrong for a whole bunch of reasons and just not really getting any satisfactory answer and kind of being a little freaked out about that. So trying to do something productive about that. And so I organized this workshop. I met Jan Kulveit and some other collaborators who we co-authored a paper called Gradual Disempowerment, which tried to lay out the argument that, well, we probably can't rely on just like comparative advantage to save us or the government. And in general, we're probably used to a world that's a little like friendlier by default than it's going to be just because right now everyone needs us. It's kind of like being the like hot girl. It's like everyone's just like happy you're there, right? And that's kind of like with humans and trying to say like, okay, but in the future it's going to be really tough. It'd be more like old people that is like, okay, cool, you might be fine as a person, but we don't actually like need to involve you. And in fact, it's going to like slow things down to involve you. Anyway, we're getting a little into the object level, but that's what I've been thinking about lately.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. 2005, that's very early. How did you find it even?
Yeah,
what hole of the web?
I don't know. When I was a teenager, I read The Age of Spiritual Machines by Ray Kurzweil. Amazing book. Like I think we should all just give him another round of applause for thinking these things through like so early and just making the basic big blob of compute argument, saying like it doesn't necessarily matter we're going to figure out the algorithms. What matters is as a first order is just how much compute there is, and in the future there's going to be more digital compute than biological. Like we're going to be able to do the same things on digital computers as on biological computers. Just very simple arguments. He was definitely overconfident in the way he framed things, but like he just was a total visionary. And then I guess online I found Overcoming Bias. This was like, Robin Hanson, Eliezer, Nick Bostrom, all these people. It's kind of like the post-extropian lists. I found Shane Legg back when he was a PhD student on LiveJournal. Yeah, so just like there was this like very embryonic community, and a lot of it was like really about basic stuff like cyborgism and just like, could the future be different? It hadn't really focused entirely on like AI risk at that point, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, you should come to a Foresight event, I feel like, because like Ray and Robin used to hang around Foresight back in those days. So we'll need to make that happen. And Robin still shows up to our events. But yeah, that's impressive. You were early on the ball, I think. So yeah, it would be interesting to sort of take off on the note that you mentioned of just this workshop that you hosted. Setting up that workshop, what were your sort of assumptions on post-AGI governance and sort of futurism and policy thinking?
Sure.
And did you have any updates from the workshop?
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll say, so I mentioned me systematically going around to every smart person I know and sort of saying, what's the plan? And not really getting a satisfactory answer. And I've been sort of going around telling everyone, hey guys, like no one has a plan. Like you probably think that they do, but they don't. But people shouldn't take my word for it, right? And maybe I missed somebody or whatever. So part of the rationale from my point of view was I'll just do the same thing, but in like a big room where everyone can like see. We invited all the plausible people who would like have something concrete to say about this and ask them concretely what, the plan should be. And we learned a lot of fun, cool stuff, but nothing that was like, oh yeah, and this is how it's like, here's our plan. So, and the workshop was concretely called Post-AGI Civilizational Equilibria, are there any good ones? And the idea was to try to bait people into saying like, obviously there's a good one, look at mine. And just to really make it clear that we were trying to ask the like sort of big, important, scary question of like, what is life going to look like? So as for updates, I mean, like disappointingly, I guess the best outcome would have been one of our speakers was like, hey guys, you've been thinking about this all wrong. Here's how we have this like, thing where we can understand roughly what's going to happen and why. The Carl Smith had an amazing keynote, was basically, can goodness compete? Sort of asking the even harder question. It's like, how can you ever compete against the beings that are just optimized for being like growth and competition and sort of using resources and winning as fast as possible, right? Like if there's anything that you care about that doesn't support those goals, it's not really clear to how you're going to last in the long run, right? So he's kind of asking the like really hard version of the question. And then Richard Ngo had this nice keynote. It was flourishing in a very unequal world and basically making the case that a lot of the ways people talk about post-AGI sometimes acts as if there's going to be these peers in the future, like these, like there's like these humans and then the AIs, and maybe we'll like trade and we'll come to some sorts of agreements and stuff. And he was saying, well, probably, he didn't put too fine of a point on it, but he was like, there's going to be, just like today, very unequal ants versus humans and apes. Like it's just doesn't really make sense to like sign a contract with an ape or whatever, right? Like on either side. And I think he was sort of trying to make the case that we should be thinking about if there is good relationships in the future, it'll look more like parent-child or something like that. And the first step is just to like acknowledge differences.
Yeah, it was interesting, the asymmetrical relations or something like that he called, like beneficial asymmetrical relationships or something like that.
Yeah, and I think it was a note of hope to point out that such relationships do exist on a regular basis throughout our civilization. And that he was sort of saying that they've sort of been de-emphasized recently, but in human history, almost all relationships were considered much more hierarchical or like asymmetric. And it didn't imply like domination. It was like necessarily, it was that there was almost everyone that you were sort of in your social web had some sort of like you owed them something and they owed you something different in return, something like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I thought both of those keynotes were kind of like updates for me, I think to some extent, or like, I think I updated positively towards the asymmetrical relationships as well, or like that's something that could potentially be one solution. Yeah. And what do you think about like, well, actually we could maybe dive into that, because another thing that relates to this is another thing that Richard Ngo wrote, and that I know you commented on. It's like a bit of a less wrong discussion, basically, where you talk about, well, Richard presents this case that he's been thinking more about. I guess it relates to these asymmetrical relationships as well, about how he's been thinking more about sort of right-wing political concepts and ideas that could actually be like useful and beneficial in a post-AGI world. And I think you had some thoughts on that in relation to like why liberalism, for example, is maybe not a great solution in a post-AGI world. Do you want to maybe just expand a bit on that?
Yeah. So the basic idea is that right now we have a bunch of institutions that are pretty great and they basically support us even if we can't directly contribute very well, like welfare and pensions. And it's actually been a big battle to have things like freedom of religion, freedom of speech, limited government. Like I think the default in human history is you get this sort of like very totalitarian state that just has opinions about everything you do. Everyone has to constantly run around and justify their existence from whatever point of view of like the new morality is that's in charge. The king's instinct isn't generally to be like, live and let live, and like, oh, you guys live how you want and we'll still do business or something. And like learning how to do that was such a step forward. And that kind of is in some sense like the success. I would say that's probably a big part of the success of the West is this notion of like liberalism of like, hey guys, positive, like it's so unintuitive how positive some it is when a bunch of people just leave each other alone except to do business and trade and build like science together and institutions and civilization, neutral rules. And so like, in a sense, that's like our most precious thing that we have in our civilization. But basically the fear, the like hypothesis that me and some other people are just starting to think about is like, well, maybe that like once humans aren't providing value, then it's not so clear that it's worth leaving us alone or that there's any advantage to this liberalist framing of society where you like really want to not try to argue about what is the true religion or the right way to live or whatever. You want to just set some very basic parameters and like then give people their own resources to manage. And so concretely, when we're all living on UBI, if anyone is ever able to say like, hey, my way of life is more deserving of UBI than yours, then that is like a very zero-sum competition. Of like bad vision of the future maybe is that we all just become full-time activists or advocates for our like UBI growing faction and trying to like reframe the narrative that our types of people deserve more resources than those guys. Those guys are just like the locusts who want to have, you know, control everything for no reason other than power. We're the ones who have like true values and really worth preserving the like flame of humanity or whatever. And so I'm not sure, like we'll probably have to try to reframe this a few different ways, but that's the basic fear.
And so when you say like our way of life, I know you talked about like how it's really easy to sort of Goodhart UBI systems, or like it easily becomes that way. Like I think an example that you gave was like, oh, everyone was made of flesh and meat. Meat gets UBI. And yeah, why is it so easy?
Sure. Well, that was just a thought experiment where I was trying to think like, okay, what does life under UBI look like? And so I'm imagining, right, like right now the government has various like requirements to get welfare or whatever. And people, of course, like lie about whether they are eligible and stuff like that. But even if ignoring like the lying part, you can imagine someone saying like, oh, wow, it's turned out that like every human is entitled to like some tiny fraction of like global GDP or something. Maybe we've set up like a pretty good UBI. Then the like next day, I think a bunch of entrepreneurial kind of people are going to say like, let me just figure out what is like the minimum viable UBI recipient, right? The minimum viable human according to this government definition. And maybe that involves something ghoulish, like make a factory full of like fetuses that you like freeze or like somehow put in suspended animation in a way that like still meets the government's bar. And now you're just like sort of welfare farming. And of course, the government's going to patch that, right? They're going to say, okay, your fetus has to be at least like this big. And then it's like, okay, well then they make, you know, there's going to be this whole like back and forth race sort of forever of the government patching the UBI requirements and people, at least like some people optimizing those. And of course, the bad thing is that in the long run, the people who optimize the hardest against whatever the like welfare rules are the ones that sort of inherit the future, at least to the extent that the humans in this scenario still matter, like in the big picture.
And so what do you think, like politically, do you think that there is some sort of equilibria to be found there? Or do you think that like the patching, there's not going to be any equilibria?
Well, it's kind of funny because like equilibrium also sounds kind of bad in a sense, right? It's like, oh, that's like permanent stasis. And like, what about growth and adaptation? And like, you know, I've made this case to a few people and they've, I think, rightly said, well, what do you want, right? Like we already have a world where the world belongs to the people who reproduce the most in a sense, like in the long run, or maybe like mimetically reproduce. There's a whole bunch of levels of competition, but it sort of can't not be that way unless you just like freeze everything. And then that's also like a very destructive thing that's maybe even worse. So maybe the way to think about it is we have to play some game, and maybe in the future we'll have a strong enough state that will sort of be forced to and have the opportunity to set new rules. And maybe then if we have the imagination, we can think of what would be an actual utility function that it would be sort of like fun and worthwhile to fight over and optimize for the foreseeable future. Maybe being good at chess or dancing should be like decide who gets to have like the most kids or whatever, right? Like I have barely begun to think about this, but you can imagine that like there might be positive seeming versions of this. And that's something that I think is like a big sort of like project that people should pick up.
Doesn't it seem like it would be, or yeah, I mean, if you have any thoughts, I'd be interested to hear, but like something like, I mean, consciousness seems like a good one, or like, you know, who needs it to like reduce that people or beings who suffer get access, or yeah, I don't know, something like that.
That's horrible, right? Like that's like the very first trap is like, what you never ever want to do is like pay people according to how much they suffer, right? Because that's the recipe for like unbounded suffering. And then you have your like child torture farms or whatever to get the most welfare. So like, absolutely no, you should pay people for being happy.
Okay, but then, okay, so, oh, well, that's interesting. Yeah, so then happiest person wins. And it seems also like it could be Goodharted, but yeah.
Well, exactly. So I guess I would say like, this is actually like, maybe this is one of the things where we don't have to worry about it because it's such a good problem to have, right? It's like if we could perfectly design our future sort of fitness function, but I think it's like actually a really good exercise to do. And I think we should have more fleshed out ideas of like, okay, the obvious pitfalls of like, yeah, paying people to suffer or have them as babies or whatever, try to like foresee at least how this conversation is going to go, right? Because we can probably look 2 or 3 steps into this like back and forth of like people good-hearted and then the government changes the rules and then they good-heart the new rules and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so maybe we put the UBI thing aside because I took us on a sidetrack with that, I think. But like back to the point of liberalism and like how that potentially collapses a bit, or like it doesn't work as well under AGI, basically. What do you think we could or should be doing about that? Like, what does it mean for our political future? Can we redesign our institutions?
Maybe. I mean, the thing is that I think liberalism will still work for like machines or whoever is productive. It's kind of like liberalism works for people who, if you just leave them alone, they're going to make everyone richer through positive sum trade. You just like want to leave those people alone a little bit, as long as there's like sort of like rule of law and a bunch of other things going on. And that they can't reproduce so fast that they just like tile the solar system before you get a chance to go out there yourself. So yeah, so it actually might not work for machines just because they might be able to reproduce so fast that they'll kind of just bring us all back to Malthusian conditions really fast. I mean, I guess I'll say it's very early days. Like I think there's only a few people who've started thinking about this. I also will say that, you know, I think one reason people haven't thought about this is they're like, well, if we're already like, it might be a kind of narrow target to hit that machines are so much more powerful than us that they haven't just directly disempowered us or taken all our stuff or, you know, killed all humans or whatever, but we still are around. It's kind of like a slow takeoff scenario. But I do think so I guess I was trying to say, I am also worried about the like acute loss of control risks. But I also now am trying to say like, even if we solve those, it's not clear what the long-term like good outcome looks like. So anyway, I'm basically trying to say, I don't have a good answer, but also we just started thinking seriously about this recently. But I guess I'll say, if we can redesign our civilization, then that's already like probably a pretty good end. Like it just seems so hard for us to achieve the necessary coordination to do such a thing. I mean, it's kind of like communism, right? It's like there's so many times everyone says, why don't we all just blank, right? And why don't we all just like not have war? Why don't we all just like, you know, feed all the poor people? And then it turns out like, oh, you have to do that. You have to create this like very powerful state, and then everyone just fights over that power. And it doesn't actually work out how you thought it would. I guess I would try to say almost anything we try to do globally today, I'd say like step 1 is massively upgrade our ability to coordinate and like forecast the future before we try anything ambitious, like determine what the new fitness function is for everybody.
When you talk about liberalism, like, I mean, one of the key benefits of liberalism, like you say, is like its adaptability or something. And so what do you think about that in relation to a potential AGI future coming at us? Like, how much do you think we should be like planning and thinking through all these potential scenarios versus trying our best to be adaptive or something when it's over us? Like, do you have a take on that?
I definitely do. And so a lot of people reasonably say like, oh, if you had tried to plan the future like 200 years ago or 100 years ago or whenever, it probably would have gone terribly. You would have not done a bad job of predicting. You would have had some like way too restrictive control that would have destroyed a lot of wealth and freedom and like probably wouldn't have solved the problem anyways. And I think that that's a very on-point criticism. My reply is basically, I think there's no way out but through. So maybe one way to say is there's a big easy win, which is that if we can get better at forecasting and making common knowledge than we have, then I think that is almost like a strict win. And so in particular, I'm really excited about like the usual like prediction markets, maybe using AI aided forecasts, right? Like, you know, human super forecasters is actually like a really amazing invention, but I think it's just sort of scratching the surface. Better coordination mechanisms, like more like Kickstarter style things. So that's sort of like the easy wins. And I think it'll just be in general, it's a matter of degree how well you can forecast and coordinate. And while humans have power and our civilization is incentivized to keep us happy and healthy, the better we can plan and coordinate. Like that's just a huge win. And I think we can and should do that. But as for like this argument, like, no, let's stick with the tried and true method of like, just set up a state, but don't really give it too clear of an objective or like, you know, utility function to optimize. Just tell it to like, give people freedom, let them innovate. I'm like, yes, that has obviously worked really well. I really don't want to throw that away if we don't have to. But I guess I would say like at this point, we should be really seriously entertaining the idea that predictably will fail. Again, I'm like super scared because I feel like I spend all my time, like most of the time feeling like everyone just wants to introduce some like socialist thing that's actually going to be disaster in practice. What I'm proposing does sound scarily similar to that. So I don't want to take any steps in that direction until we've thought it through more. At this stage, I'm just sort of calling for more thought.
Interesting. So the work that you're doing now, is that's within your role as like a computer science professor, and you're going to put out a paper, or how can we follow this?
Well, I'm pretty active on Twitter, and like my papers, I try to publicize them. Yeah, but I mean, I guess like I do have a side project on using LLMs trained on historical data to forecast like the past, like from their point of view, it's the future. So we can try to validate how well we can get LLMs to do some of the like long-term forecasting that I think that they would be able to help us with. But I mean, overall, this is like a project that's much larger than me, and like other people are barking up the same tree. I worked a little bit with the societal impact team at Anthropic, and it's funny because I think they have a actually fairly similar view, but it's pretty rough because like they're doing a lot of really good work on cataloging what's happening and saying like, oh, this is the people who are using AI for their jobs, and these are the ones who are being replaced versus augmented and stuff. But it's very like Cassandra, sort of like they're doomed to just watch it happen. And even though Anthropic and the other companies have like robust policy teams, like, and all this stuff is beyond the scope of any one company. So it's like, it's a pretty rough position for them to be in because their job is to watch something that this company's scope is probably too small to address.
So I think it would be interesting because on this podcast, I've interviewed people that I think come from, I mean, honestly, most of our interviews lately have been in relation to AI, and people have very different expectations and definitions of what might come. And to me, I categorize your expectation as like AGI is inevitable and it's coming relatively soon. Is that a fair like interpretation?
So the inevitable part, pretty much, save some sort of like global don't build AGI Amish totalitarian thing. And soon, I guess I'll say like, I've thought about this to some extent, but I haven't done any like detailed like forecasting like the AI 2027 folks. I mean, I think those guys are also more like AI 2028 or 2029 now. But yeah, let's say like, I don't really expect my kids to have normal jobs, maybe concretely. And my kids are like, my oldest is like 6. So like somewhere in the next like 15 years, it's like stuff changes enough that it's like all of our current scripts about how do you provide value in the world and like navigate as a person mostly don't make that much sense anymore.
Well, that's really interesting. And so what has made you make those assumptions, basically?
I mean, the first one is just a very big one of like, the brain is a biological computer and it's almost certainly not the most efficient thing. And even if we build machines that are not quite like energy efficient, the fact that you can copy digital memory is just like such a huge, like overpowered ability. It's always just going to be worth investing in like the very best machine, like lawyer or engineer or mind, and then making 1 million copies of it than it is going to be to train 1 million human engineers. It's just, yeah. So I think it's not going to be very long before there's no alpha in humans, basically. And it's always just like, oh man, I just got to like get my one amazing AGI mind to work better. So that to me, that's like the big thing that changes. It's not like the day that everyone actually loses their job or is like actually completely obsolete. Everything changes. It's the day that it's like common knowledge. It's like, oh, like school is kind of like pointless, right? Like it's one of these things that like gradually people kind of think it like it's true in some cases, some of the time. But I do think there's going to be sort of like a, not preference cascade, but like the thing when something becomes common knowledge, and that's going to be the like big, like depressing day.
And so you see it as sort of inevitable, and are you not, what do you think about that? Like, let's just stop it then? Or do you think that it could go well? Or like, do you just see the, yeah.
Yeah, well, here's, maybe I could bring up like a moral crux that I think I've identified with some other people, particularly Robin Hanson, which is like, if you are worried about the future containing all sorts of, like, basically, are you worried about you yourself particular surviving and flourishing in the future, or just like life doing okay and surviving and flourishing? Because if you're okay with the second thing and you're not too worried about like your particular bloodline or even like species surviving, then like you kind of don't have to worry about anything, right? It's like probably whatever ends up taking over in the future is going to be having fun, like high-fiving each other, taking over the solar system and building all sorts of stuff. So, you know, just like us, it's like, oh man, think of all the like horrible wars and extinctions and all the stuff that led to humans. But now we're like, oh, awesome, we have this amazing world and we can play in, right? And it's like, you know, whoever's in the future is probably going to be pretty happy that they're there, more or less. So in that sense, it's like, you know, don't worry about it. And then you're kind of, yeah, it's like 95% chance everything's going to be basically fine. And then, but if you're like, I want my particular kids to have like rich and fulfilling lives in the same way that I have had, and humans not to go to extinct or whatever, like, then you have a much like narrower target to hit. And then it's like, and I think also, again, it's like, what are you happy with? So I think people tend to be a little annoyed by me having a very sort of high standard for what a good world counts as. I'm like something like about as good life as I've had for like almost everybody, like, not everybody all the time, obviously, but like, a similar fraction of people as today, probably like increasing. And in particular, like my family getting to like basically not be somehow completely marginalized. Then it's like, well, that just seems like that was always going to be hard, because in the very long run, like even biological evolution was going to be or even just cultural evolution was going to be causing the same kind of obsolescence and marginalization that you're worried about, which I totally agree with. So I guess I'm like, no. The same thing happened to all of our ancestors, where they got outcompeted by like more adaptive descendants of theirs. That to me is like kind of crummy. And I really agree it's better than nothing. But if you're okay with that, then again, it's kind of like whatever, you're probably going to be fine no matter what.
That's actually a really good, I think. I'd like to go back to the gradual disempowerment point, because you mentioned it really briefly in the beginning, and it was this paper that came up earlier this year, and everyone in my bubble has read it and talked about it, and it seems to have had like quite an impact. What do you see as sort of the biggest implications of this assumption of like AI will most likely gradually disempower us?
Sure. So I think the main one is that we can't all just relax and assume that UBI will be fine, because basically we will be the like bitter clingers that are like probably like culturally demonized for wanting our ridiculously expensive sort of retirements. And that there's basically like all the different parts of our civilization are going to probably work to marginalize us, because that's sort of what serves growth. I mean, so the reason that paper needed to be written from my point of view was just talking to so many people who are like, but surely this institution that has always served us well will continue to serve us well. And like the government is there to serve humans. Or like even sometimes people say like, but I don't understand who are these machines trading with? If the humans all go broke, then won't all the machines go broke, because then there's like no more economy? And it's like, no, like this is like monkeys saying like, who are the humans going to trade bananas with? Like, how are they going to survive with their own economy that doesn't involve any like trading with monkeys? It's like, they don't need us. So the point is that like, I don't know, I'm already afraid of the government. I already think like governments are these things that we sort of accidentally make, and they end up like doing horrible things to us on a regular basis. But I think a lot of people have this intuition. It's like, why would, like, sometimes the government goes a little bit wrong, but ultimately serves us on the long run. And I think both things are kind of true, because the governments that really don't serve their people collapse or like don't grow very fast and get outcompeted, like USSR. Like the point is that like our intuitions about how well they're going to treat us have been formed in this world where the governments like needed us. And then it's like, well, even if they hated us, it's like some governments really kind of act as if they hate their people, but it's like, but they still keep them alive, and they still can't imprison everybody or liquidate everybody. And that's not going to be the case anymore.
Which is a very scary thing to think. If we take that sort of seriously, is there anything in terms of like interventions or anything that you could help preserve like sort of meaningful human agency? Or even like if you think, let's say we don't care about the specifically human thing, we care about like your family getting to live on, but like uploading is an option. Would that be like a positive future or like a potential solution for you in this case?
Sort of. I mean, uploading is kind of like the old person moving from a big house into a small apartment. It's like it reduces the tension, because they're not like wasting all these resources. And I expect kind of like one of my like visions of the future is like, I'm like, okay, the world is covered in robot factories, but I have my like little like 1 acre plot of land where I'm just going to like live with my extended family or friends or whatever. Or a little human city, or like, and we don't really need that much resources. Just leave us alone. You guys are also rich with your like amazing robot civilization. But then some of the robots saying, or like machine minds saying like, you guys are using so many resources to house like only a few humans. With those, if you were uploaded, or if we just replaced your house with like another data center, we could house like millions of minds, including your own, also a bunch of like much more deserving and sort of like morally superior versions of yourselves or humanity or whatever. So it's like sort of ridiculous, it's like criminally decadent of you to use these resources that aren't on the like most morally deserving beings, right? It would be like paving over an entire country to make like a wildlife preserve for like a single gorilla or something. It's like, no, like look at all the suffering orphans and refugees you've created because of this like wasteful thing you've done. So uploading is like, I think something that is one of the ways I think we'll be marginalized, in the sense that it's just like we'll be forced to use less resources, either by just like market forces or it being seen as this like moral outrage that we're wasting so much. And then that helps a lot. And then I guess depending on your point of view, though, it is like just one more step to being completely disempowered. Like I really love that there's like no like landlord of like physics that can like kick me out, right? But as soon as you're like hosted on a data center, it's like, oh man, like someone can cut off my power, or just like, schedule me for later, but never actually get around to like running me again or something like that.
But so if we remove the uploading, or like that answers the uploading question, is there anything else you see that like what can we do to avoid this gradual disempowerment challenge, basically?
Well, so the basic way I think about it is that we've been designing our governments and institutions on easy mode. We will have to learn this art of designing even more robustly aligned institutions, which I think is going to be a very hard art to do. I mean, I really hate it when people say, like, let's just ask the AGI how to solve alignment or what to do. But I guess, like, I think in general, there's like, if we as a civilization become more competent, depending on the timing of things, it might sort of be okay because we can outpace the worsening incentives by upgrading our institutions as we go to make sure that they continue to respect things like human property rights and avoid all the other like fast and slow kind of loss of control. I mean, another way of thinking about it is like everyone, I think, has been okay. We all have this instinct, I think, as like sort of kids. Like the naive thing is like when you rule, you care about everything. And then we've all sort of had to have this counterintuitive lesson beaten into us of like, no, just live and let live. Don't worry about where things are going. Don't like make pointed, like inflammatory like predictions about like, oh, this group is having too many kids or whatever, like, or this religion is growing or whatever. Like people rightly are like, hey, you're really playing with fire if you try to like predict which group is going to be powerful in the future and like coordinate now to stop them, because then that never really ends and you end up just like fighting over the future in detail all the time. We have this like much more like live and let live thing, which is very counterintuitive. But in a sense, I think we've sort of maybe taken it too far and are just like, no one should steer civilization. No one should like try to be agentic at the top level. Again, that seems like super, super scary because if we ever do manage to make an agentic world government, we probably can't ever come back from that. But my basic claim is like probably someone or something, probably there is going to be some sort of like global agency, and we sort of need to like practice and upgrade ourselves and sort of grow up to be able to handle that kind of responsibility and planning. And I'm not sure we can, and I'm not sure it's going to go very well. And it's again, very scary, but the basic vision is learn how to govern so well that we can make governments that will treat their people well, even when they don't need them.
Interesting. Very, very. I think this leads to, well, I want to dive deeper into that question, I guess. The world government, like that's a very obviously centralized way of governing. One thing that we like, I think at Foresight, we often talk more about like multipolar AI futures and more like a future where we're able to have like checks and balances and a more like, I guess, liberalism type of approach to it, and see that as like the more safe way ahead, as in like that we could keep each other in balance. But you seem to have come to like the opposite conclusion there. Could you talk a bit more about this idea?
First I want to like attack my own position, which is to say like, I keep talking about this world government, but yeah, maybe this is one of those like things where the naive analysis always thinks that there's going to be this like world agentic thing, but actually in reality, life finds a way and it's more complicated, right? If you look at our like planet, it's not like there's one being that has filled all the niches, and it's like also we've had like empires rise and fall, but when one political party becomes really big, often it like splits in two, or there's like a new religion that is founded that then like somehow it takes over. And so maybe the equilibrium isn't that there's like a global agentic thing. It's that empires rise and fall, and there's this more like chaotic, like attractor sort of thing. In which case, I think then it's kind of even worse though for the people who aren't productive in that world, because it's like, well, then no one's going to be able to like fund the like foundation that keeps them around forever if empires rise and fall, right? Like that's one thing that happens when the empire falls is all your like foundations get looted or whatever. So, but anyway, but I guess I'll say like, like liberalism is great. And I think it's sort of like still underrated in a sense because people don't understand how amazingly positive Summit is today. But I just don't understand how we're supposed to stick around for all that long when there is like competition at the top level, because the polities or like the governments that focus on machine economy and machine growth will just dominate against the ones that spend significant resources on like paying the human pensions. I mean, the hope is that like growth is there's one way that forward is that like growth is so fast that our demands are so small that it doesn't even matter. It's like, oh yeah, just give the humans whatever they want. It's still a rounding error. Then that's kind of a feasible future where everything's okay. But then it's also like such a crazy future where everything is changing so fast that I'm also kind of like, I'm not like, we're like a mouse in the bed with an elephant or whatever, right? It's like still scary from that point of view.
I wonder, like, one of the things that I think confuses me sometimes in these types of discussions is if people are just coming at it from very different assumptions, as in, like, this more multipolar worldview is just assuming a less capable AGI, type of AGI, and what you're imagining is just way more capable? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know. To me, I actually really don't like plans that rely on the AGI being smart enough to solve global coordination problems. And this is also actually a huge crux, for instance, between me and like Ryan Greenblatt. And I think other people that say sort of AGI will solve it is, from their point of view, it's like, well, maybe our institutions aren't very aligned with us, but if you could at least give everybody their own AGI that was aligned with them, they would be able to come up, like cut some global deal where everyone agrees to like divvy up the resources and the growth. And it's sort of fine from there on. And that's plausible. And I don't hate it as like a scenario. It's just that it's like, well, what if we have a slow takeoff? What if we just have a bunch of AGIs and each human is like, hey, I want you to help me, get a good bid on this market, or get a date, or like play the normal sort of like messy games that are somewhat zero sum. And none of the AGIs has the ability to stop and say like, oh, can't you see that we're all like have this horrible like dating culture or a market or whatever that's leading to bad equilibria? Let's stop and redesign everything. That's possible. We've done it before, but it's also just like hard. It might be harder when most of the market participants are even more sophisticated. So like concretely, like let's imagine that I'm like a pre-tenure academic and my AGI is like trying to help me, and I'm like, hey, I want you to help me get tenure. And it's like, okay, I'm going to help you like spam, like maybe I'll help you do good research, but also just like spam the citation metrics or whatever, right? Like hack the incentives. And this just like makes the global system work worse because everyone's like, now their AGIs are all spamming and everyone has like 1,000 papers a day. And the question is, can some academics get together and say, stop. I'm going to risk my tenure, or stop and like find some new global way of evaluating contributions or something like that. Or like a dating market. It's like, help me get a date. It's like, okay, I'll spam all the like dating sites. It's like, no. The real solution is to like step back and like fix our entire culture or something, right? It's like, well, maybe we could do that, but also it might be this sort of like very tough global coordination problem that no one has ever empowered or incentivized enough to actually fix.
Well, first I'll ask, is there anything else on this like hegemon AI versus multipolar futures that you think would be interesting to touch on?
Not really, but I have a like half-written sort of post about like what is stable at the top. Like there's the case that we should expect, Earth to be dominated by some global thing, because once you have global power, you can use it to like purge all dissent and control everything to make sure that you stay in power. On the other hand, when life finds a way, like even modern humans get cancer and die all the time, or like infections, like things where the sort of like little guy realizes he can just start growing and, you can just do things. Then suddenly, or like there's a new religion that starts, or, that changes everyone's minds and they decide that we don't want to be the global hegemon anymore or whatever. So it's actually not clear to me what's actually stable at the top level. And at the very top level, of course, like there's probably other alien civilizations out there that will eventually meet. So there has to be, if we think really, really long term, there already is some sort of like multipolarity there.
Yeah. So if I said like, David, you're in control of the world and you get to sort of choose what you think we should be doing, like, and you have one option could even be like, well, I want us to stop developing AGI, or like, that could be an option. Or you could choose like how we do it. What would you suggest? Like, what are your best takes on this? That's a very difficult question.
Sure. No, but I think I basically would say like, if we had the global coordination to do things like stop building AGI, I probably would say, yes, let's do it. But also it's like, if we could stop war, I would, like if we had the global coordination to do that, it would be about as hard as like stopping global war. And so I think.
And would it be stopping AGI for now or stopping it like forever?
I would say, well, I don't know. I guess I would say for now, in the sense that like, I always want to preserve optionality. So any option where you like do it for now or do it forever, I would always put the like push the do it for nothing, as long as I don't expect to feel crazy or something like that.
Yeah, good point. Oh, yeah, sorry.
I guess maybe the reason that I'm not like doing a hunger strike or whatever right now is because I don't really think we have the power to productively stop AGI development. I think what we have the power to do is basically ban civilian AGI development. Like if enough people were like, this is really dangerous and terrible idea, what would happen is that we would have a bunch of like NSA run or like basically like military run programs. Basically everyone at OpenAI is like going to end up working for the government, and the guy running that program is going to be selected to be like a very optimistic guy, just like the current CEOs. And that will be like probably a step backwards. I'm not actually very confident about this, honestly, versus like the current like sort of semi-open approach. So, but anyway, I guess I'm trying to say like, that's the reason that I'm not spending too much time talking about a pause, is because I'm like people shouldn't take our word on this, like should find ways to build consensus that is like more auditable and more clearly credible to third parties, and also build these muscles for like global coordination. And I mean, you might say, well, we already like sort of control nuclear development and stuff. And maybe that's right. I don't know. I guess I would say I'm not really an expert on international coordination.
And so you're not for a pause, or
Well, I'm saying
yeah.
like if we could actually pause, I would. If I
Okay.
like, I'm not advocating for a pause right now, just because I don't think that's what will happen if we advocate for a pause right now. But it's very complicated because it sort of depends who's saying it and who's listening. So
Yeah, but that's okay. But that's good. So if you could do anything, you would pause. And if we remove the pause option, it would be something like, yeah, what would be the second best option then, that you think is more realistic, maybe?
yeah, I think like right now, I basically view it as we end up muddling through with some ability, some amount of coordination and control, and humans never get like rapidly disempowered because we manage to kind of like slow our decline. I guess one thing is I'll say is that all this stuff I'm saying sounds very scary from the point of view of our current, the way we like view things. I guess, like I said before, sort of whoever inherits the future is kind of going to be glad they did. And to the extent that all these like cultural mechanisms and adaptations operate, probably by the time we actually do get disempowered, a large fraction of people will be like, oh, but the machines deserve it, right? And like maybe they do. I don't know. But the point is that like, even if they didn't, we would still end up being like culturally conditioned to like see them as our like superiors and successors or whatever. So it's actually probably not going to like feel that bad if you don't think ahead too much. And then like to me, the question is like, okay, but in that world, could we actually make them our like worthy successors, as like Dan Fagella always says? It's not clear to me that we have much influence over that. Robin Hanson is very optimistic that we just can use the usual mechanisms of like leaving legacies. Like we can have sort of like set really amazing examples and like have these like sort of like J.K. Steinhardt was talking about, it's sort of like moral fables for machines. I guess I don't really view those as having that much sticking power, but I don't know. I feel like Robin's thought about this more than me, and he's like very optimistic about us being able to leave these like cultural legacies.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it positively. And yeah, I guess I agree with that, or like I think that whoever inherits the future would be happy, like you say.
Yeah, well, and I mean that we'll sort of be kind of happy with it because everything in our culture is going to be telling us like, isn't it amazing that our like mind children are like doing all this amazing stuff, and also we'll be like living in amazing like VR fun games and stuff. So it's like if you want to, you can find the like, you'll find the like angry message boards where everyone's like, we're being disempowered, this sucks, I hate it, and like that those are not going to be sticky in the sense that like if you talk about that, you're just going to sound like a loser who's on the wrong side of history. So it's like that's just sort of how things go. Is that like by the time you've lost, everyone sort of thinks it's good that you lost usually.
Yeah, that's true. You can turn anything into a positive in that sense. I'm definitely also like, I think more on the team of like caring about life in the long term than myself being alive, for example, which I think is a crux with some like longevity people sometimes, and it's interesting. And yeah, I think it would also be interesting to talk about this like people thinking about the far future, because I know when we were talking ahead of this recording, you mentioned something like that you think people think they don't care about the far future.
Yeah,
but yeah.
And maybe this is good, right? So yeah, basically the claim is if you ask someone like, what, I don't know, are they going to graduate from their university, or like, is their kid going to have this good outcome? They like really care and they like work towards it. But if you ask them like, hey, do you care how many humans there are alive in 100 years? Or if like in 1,000 years, if it's like aliens or humans win the galactic war or whatever, they're just like, bah, I mean, like sort of live and let live. Like it's all cool. But then if you sort of like, you do some exercise where you sort of chain things together, you're like, okay, so like one day you have a bunch of like healthy great grandchildren, and then like 10 years later, they don't exist anymore or something. Like what sort of like, how is that acceptable? Like paint me a picture of how that goes, that you're like fine with it. And then they kind of are like, oh yeah, I guess I don't want all the humans to die actually, now that I think about it. And so I guess it kind of bugs me when there's a bunch of people that are like, why are you so worried about this? Like, it's fine. And I'm like, I think that like 10 years from now or whatever, when the like actual disempowerment is happening, you're going to be like, oh crap, no, I don't want to be disempowered. No. And I'll be like, I told you so. Like, you actually did care about this. It's just like easy. Robin Hanson always talks about like near mode and far mode. And basically like far mode isn't even for making good predictions. It's just for kind of like building consent or building like good vibes and getting along with people and signaling that you have the right loyalties and stuff. And I think he's onto something there, that there is just like, it sounds really petty and small-minded and sort of unpleasant to be like, I'm actually going to keep being agentic all the way into the future. It's like, God, let it go. Like, this guy's so tiresome. He's always just like worried about protecting his stuff. And I'm like, well, whatever, man. Like, I just care. Like, I just don't want to be able to like have to tell my kids like, sorry, you're like being dispossessed because we didn't like think ahead,
That's a really good take. I hadn't heard about the near mode and far mode, but it does make sense. It often feels quite posing a lot of the, or like I think of like a lot of the climate discussion or things like that in general. That's sort of the thing that you're referring to, right? Just like that, it's more signaling when people say they really care about.
Yeah, exactly. And then like the near mode version of the discussion is like, okay, so like what are the trade-offs? Like, are you willing to sacrifice this much, make these people poor now so that these other people will have like, this things better? Like help me figure out what are the actual things that you value more or less than like solving this problem. And then people are kind of allergic to that. They're like, oh my God, no, this is like, Robin would say that they're saying it's like a sacred thing, and they don't. One of the things you don't do with sacred values is like rank them or like frame them in terms of concrete trade-offs. And so that's, I guess, maybe if I can hopefully bring anything to this like futurism discussion, it's like we have to have a long set of tools to bring ourselves constantly into near mode, act like we're planning like a trip to the grocery store or something that we like actually have opinions on and we're like actually going to do. Then rather than like far mode, is like, what would it sound good for me to like talk like? So that was actually part of the point of the workshop too, is like this idea of a singularity, I think, has been really corrosive because it makes people just be like, I can't influence the future, so I might as well just say whatever sounds good so that like people can't be mad at me later. And I'm like, no. Like, what if it is just like you have to wake up tomorrow and decide like, do you give money to the machine economy or the human economy? Like, your pension plan, you're investing or whatever. Like, what do you actually do? And then they're like, oh crap, that's like a harder problem.
It's a very, very hard problem. Yeah, very, very glad that you're working on this basically and thinking about this, because I think most people will just like shut off when it comes to this type of very heavy.
And maybe like one of the part of my like origin story is just like, being in Silicon Valley and asking people like, so but what are you personally going to be doing like after post-AGI? And then they just always had like the most like flippant answers. They're like, oh, I'll be clicking accept suggestion over again all day, ha ha ha. Or like, I'll be taking a well-deserved vacation. And it's like, you're just like refusing to like think concretely about this. So
yeah, no, that's very true. Is it, you point on like people actually having preference about the far future? Is it something that you've actually like tried to dig into them about, like more than this like post-AGI thing? Is it something that you've discovered that people have any particular preferences or thoughts on the long-term future? Or is it more like super general, like, yeah, they want life to continue existing?
Well, that's a good question. No, I haven't sat down and done some like concrete exercises with a bunch of different people, except for the just this one I mentioned of like, you say you're okay with like being replaced, but like when's the day that you're like okay with it? And they're also like, well, if it's gradual and humans are somehow involved and like somehow if it's like less sudden, it's less bad or whatever. And I'm just like, it just sounds like you're kind of spreading out the badness. But like, I will say, yeah, this isn't a very well thought out school of thought. I guess, the whole like coherent extrapolated vision was, I guess, meant to be it's a very similar idea where he's basically saying like, yes, we obviously barely have coherent preferences over the distant future, but if you let us think for longer, we probably would. There's also actually a really nice counter essay, unless wrong, I forget who wrote it, basically saying like, okay, imagine that I get like a million years to think about some moral question of like, what would I prefer? Like pretty much all the answers now are like, just think about it longer and then eventually you'll decide. But like now imagine it's like the end of the universe and you've like thought about it for a million years. Like it's not really clear what you're supposed to have used to decide these things. I mean, I guess, but I think the good rejoinder to that is that like, if you find yourself having thought about something for really long and you're like fine with a bunch of different answers, then like whatever, just choose one at random. But like, you clearly don't have very strong preferences over this thing in this sense, so it doesn't really matter.
You mentioned before that I think you've been looking more at forecasting and you seem kind of excited about it as like something that could be useful to us. What is it that draws you to forecasting? What role do you think that it could play in helping
I guess it's just sort of like the usual sort of like rationalist shtick on a bigger scale, which is like, again, like the near mode thing. It's like, you can say like, like people talk about, if you ask them like who's going to win a war, they usually like give you an answer that's like sort of more like about like rah, like trying to build consensus than like, actually predicting the future. And there's all sorts of like self-fulfilling prophecy problems here. But I basically feel like a lot of people's discussions would be way, 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 way more high quality if there was even a bad consensus about future outcomes. So like, imagine there's like a, I don't know, meticulous question of like there are such actually questions of like, I don't know, will humanity survive this thing, or like, when will AGI occur and stuff like that. And I guess also those have like upgraded the discourse to some extent. I think there also they've sort of been given maybe like roughly the right amount of seriousness in the sense that like, it's not clear that even super forecasters are really up to this, right? Actually, there was like a major failure, I'd say, of the Tetlock super forecasters where they were asked sort of just like, what is the possibility that AGI is not a nothing burger? And they basically gave, it was like 0.4% or something chance. And to me then, yeah, like it was like the Forecasting Research Institute. In my mind, it's like the Nothing Ever Happens Institute. Like I think a lot of super forecasters actually have like a heuristic of like weird sounding stuff probably just not going to happen, which is like a good heuristic. I think that they're wrong in this case. Of course, like no one should take my word for it. But I do think that that hasn't stand the test of time very well. And I think actually Tetlock was tweeting about this like a few weeks ago saying like, oh, this actually like kind of aged pretty poorly. So anyway, the point is that like we need to have like stress tested long-term super forecasting as a like this should be the thing that like all the bright young things are excited about, right? Like not like physics or AI, but like long-term super forecasting. And if that was the like, you know, I'm going to be famous because I'm going to have predicted the thing, like I'm going to have been calibrated at the like 10-year mark and everyone's going to make statues for me or whatever. I'm like, that's the civilization that I'm going to like bet on. And so that's the civilization I'm trying to move us towards. Yeah, I guess I'll say this is like just, there's like a collaboration that I'm actually not doing that much work on, but Alec Bradford and another guy, Nick Levine, are trying to train an LLM trained only on historical data, like up to 1930. And then later we want to make versions that's like every decade. There's like an LLM that only knows about all the human text up until that date.
Mm.
Then build some sort of scaffolding to ask like, okay, what's going on, going to be happening like 5 or 10 years from now? And then of course we have the ground truth so we can evaluate those. It has all the usual problems with like back testing, and it's hard to do this well. And it's very easy to leak information back into the past. But that would be one way that we could make a super forecasting framework that we could actually, like third parties could say, oh, it actually did kind of predict like the fall of the Berlin Wall or World War II or whatever, like in broad strokes. This is like evidence that it's like well calibrated about these big events. This is like a very fledgling technical art. And there's a whole bunch of problems of like, well, how do you even frame the questions? There's like actually a startup in London now, Mantic, that is trying to provide like this sort of like LLM forecasting as a service, but all their backtesting is only on models that are trained in like the last like year or two, because there's not really any LLMs smart enough to do forecasting that are more than like a year or two old. But there's like all sorts of tough calibration questions. Like if you use yes or no questions, like, are you worried that like North Korea will do this particular thing or whatever? It's like the models can get really good scores by just basically saying like yes all the time, because if you ask it only about stuff that did happen, it's like if a future time traveler came back to me and was like, hey, are you worried about like Latvia invading Canada? I'd be like, well, I wasn't until you mentioned it, right? So there's just like a whole bunch of like open technical questions about like how do you set up these designs without leaking information back from the future.
But that's such an interesting project, though. I hope you're going to share about it when you're, at later stages.
Oh yeah. When we have something to show, we'll show it.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and I think that also you mentioned Robin Hanson's Futarchy idea as something that you're potentially excited about for, helping us just create a better future. Do you want to expand? I think maybe also it's good to give a brief on what the idea is, and then like if you have any thoughts on how it could help us, basically.
Sure. Well, this is just another area that I'm just sort of getting into. But as far as I understand it, the basic way that Robin would explain it is that we should be governing much more based on predictions by participants in prediction markets who are incentivized to make like good, well-calibrated predictions. We should separate out right now we vote based on like who we think is going to represent our values and who's going to do a good job of actually like implementing policy. And he's saying, no, we should vote on our values. And there should be like some sort of slate of like, what should our government be optimizing for? And that's like a utility function that we can all help write. And sort of everyone's qualified in a sense to do that. And then when it comes to like, okay, how do we achieve those goals? And we have this sort of like very free market, libertarian, competition-based thing where you basically, everyone is forecasting like, if we do this policy, what is the outcome going to be? Is it going to like raise or lower our like global utility function? People are making bets on that all the time. And these are like experts. These are like all the like finance quant kind of people who like spend all day, every day digesting all the relevant information and trying to make really good forecasts. And so then the idea is that you should expect to get much better policies that like the best available information says will actually achieve your goals. So there's all sorts of reasons why this is like hard to do in practice, but it's still, to the extent that we can move in this direction, I think is going to be a big upgrade.
Yeah, I think Futarchy is one of few ideas that keeps coming up as like this could potentially be a really, really exciting, just innovative way of governing. And we could potentially also be in like a pretty good position to set it up, or like we should do experiments with it at this point, I feel like, at least.
Yeah, well, and there have been lots of experiments, and like I think Rob himself helped set up a bunch of internal prediction markets inside of companies. And then I think, as far as I understand, the reason that these didn't stick around all that much was um, that the leaders felt it like undermined their authority, and it like undermined their ability to like make self-fulfilling prophecies to some extent, I think.
Mm.
So, if they're saying like, hey, we're going to like crush it this quarter, or we're going to ship this thing, and then the prediction market is like, no, we won't, then he just looks weak and stupid. Um,
Yeah.
and like you might say, well, this is all just like the self-fulfilling prophecy thing. And maybe there's like some better, like some technology we can have to address that, where like, I don't know, the CEO is like, and now I'm going to like subsidize the position of like, yes, we will ship. So like, they get to use their de facto power to like actually like do the self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah. So the point is that like, I think this is sort of like an open technical question of like, is there a way that you can make this compatible with the incentives of like leadership of most organizations?
Yeah. I mean, it seems I get that. I would also feel disempowered if the forecast told me that it's not going to happen, even though it's probably right. But yeah, I guess the self-fulfilling prophecy question I feel like it's a pretty important one to dig into in relation to forecasting. Do you have anything that you want to say on it, or do you think that it's best just to?
No, yeah, I think that's, it's a really interesting technical area. I like actually spent a little while thinking about working on that instead of safety, just because it's like a concrete technical question. But yeah, I'm not an expert.
Yeah. So I think let's shift a bit. So, start to round off. Is there anything like what gives you optimism or hope in your work and life today, despite, working on thinking about these type of heavy challenges all the time?
Yeah. Well, one is that there's like a lot of, I think, like bright people who are now starting to sort of see this similar big picture to me, which makes me feel like at least I'm not crazy. And another one is like, we are going to have AGIs to help us with stuff. So that's like, that is going to help in the short run. And the other one is that like, again, I think the worst case is okay in the sense that if you have a broad enough moral circle, like something is going to be having fun colonizing the galaxy. So it's like, yeah. So like doom versus not, it's more like, well, there's like sort of maybe like sort of three major, like big baskets of outcomes. And like I rank them, and maybe one of them I view as like a million times worse than the other one, but like there's no arguing taste. So I don't know, like it's tough to, yeah. It's like one of these things, like when people try to get rich, it's like, there's no like rich or not. It's like, you can always just like try to get more. And same with like the goodness of the world in the future. I'm like, sort of however good you tell me the world's going to be, I'll probably still be like, let me see if I can make this better. And like, you might be like, God, just let it go. But I'm like, whatever. That's just kind of my personality.
Yeah. I think when we were talking before this interview as well, you said that it sort of took you years to sort of emotionally process the idea that no one is coming to save us. How did you sort of go through that adjustment?
I mean, yeah, I guess, yeah. So in particular, like, maybe starting around like 2019 to like 2022, just like feeling like the big picture was kind of like obviously different and worse in some ways than most sort of smart adults in the rimmy kind of people were painting it. And I kept waiting for a bunch of them to like wake up, and some people that I like respected to sort of do that. And the thing is that like a bunch of them did, and then I feel like didn't have great answers. And the thing is like I don't either, right? But like maybe like Talik Buterin is a good example where I'm like, this is a guy who's like big picture, smart person, and is going to realize this eventually. And then like surely, like hopefully he'll have something like really like not necessarily reassuring, but just kind of like, oh guys, like here's how it's all going to work. And then he had like DIAC, and I'm like, I mean, it's not like, I don't want to poo-poo it because it's like about the best anyone has done in terms of like, here's a concrete agenda we can make. But just like being like, oh, is that the best plan we have? That's like not a very reassuring plan. So then just like, maybe I'm in the same position that I'm saying humanity is in. Is like, okay, you just have to like level up and become the adult in the room. And it's unpleasant, but like, you got to do what you got to do.
Do you have any like just systems for yourself in terms of like, well, right now I'm here, I'm present with my family, and I'm just like plugging into this? Because that seems like otherwise you would just like lose your mind completely. If you're always in that sphere.
I mean, I think I have the normal like mental health like approaches anyone who manages, just like make sure you get exercise and sun and family and stuff. But I mean, I think also at some point I just sat down and thought about what it would actually take for me to be a pleasant and fun person to be around. Like just don't be a like downer all the time. Like it's just not hard. That of all the like crosses I have to bear, just like not being a downer around my kids or friends or whatever, like is just, it's like that's table stakes. That's easy. You just have to think about it and try not to be that way.
Yeah. Well, so the last thing I'd like to end on is if you, again, like get to think about with the Existential Hope program, what I want is to have people think a bit bigger and more ambitiously about like how good the future could be if we actually like tried and, we're able to coordinate and just be more intentional about it. And so if you get to imagine like one, or it could even be just a few ideas or something of like, what's a really positive future? Like if things go really well, how well do you think they could go? What are you excited about if you think about really positive futures?
Yeah, concretely, I think there's just so much like meaning and amazing, like not like coincidences, but like little things where you did something and then later it actually like affected the world in a way that like you didn't anticipate and was like kind of cool, like that are just totally invisible to us now, right? Like, the actual just life and the world is like so rich all the time, and like only sort of like sometimes some people get to see that like in a limited way. So I don't know, like I guess I just, when I think of like the distant or in the future, I'm like, well, probably like at least no matter what's going to happen along the way, we're all going to be able to like understand what's happening better. We'll probably understand how to just keep ourselves sort of like mentally awake more of the time. And so I do think that like in that sense, the default is this like much sort of like richer experience of the world for at least like some beings.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, David. I think this has been like a very, very interesting conversation, and we've been a bit like all over, but for me at least, it's a lot of these things felt new and extremely important to consider. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.